Hello, YouTube. I have a story to tell, and I'm going to get right to it. This is my ex-Jehovah's Witness story. My name is Elle. I'm 49 years old, and I was born in 1975, and that is the year that my mom accepted a Bible study. It was actually my dad that accepted the study, and then they studied with him. He figured out that there wasn't a hell, and so he went on just sort of living his life. My mom, on the other hand, was very lonely. She was in a brand new town. They had grown up in California and they were on their way to Washington. So I was born in Oregon. And my mom was lonely, my dad was at work and she was at home, and she accepted this Bible study. And I just read in my baby book that I just found the other day, my baby book that she said that I went to my first meeting when I was 3 months old, and she said I was very good. Is that so crazy how we always had to be so good? Like, geez, a 3-month-old, like, it's so funny to even, it's kind of sick to really think about. Yeah. Oh, she was so good. Oh, wow. So when I was 10 years old, this whole time, my mom and my dad, they lived very different lives. When they were married, they were kind of the same, but then he kind of went one way, she went the other. So my dad suffered with alcoholism and drug addiction his whole life. My mom was very much the opposite. Like, she never had a drink. She was such a righteous Jehovah's Witness. She raised 3 of us kids, me being the oldest, in the organization. And when I was 10 years old, we fled for our lives to Texas because of the abuse that he had put us through, and the abuse that the congregation and the elders, they were always telling my mom to go back to my dad, even though it was really dangerous. And so one time when she had said that he had started to get really violent and was having some guns under the bed and had threatened to really kill all of us, that she decided he was serious, like he really was going to take our lives. And so we fled to Texas with some witness friends, and that's where she had divorced him. So at 10 years old until I was 16, my mom stayed single. And she always had this story of, like, she's looking for Mr. Right, Brother Right, she's looking for him. Well, when I was 16 years old, she met this guy that she had just been introduced to by her friend. And all he was a witness. That was it. Like, he didn't have anything special going on about him at all. He was single and he was a witness, and she married him about 3 weeks later. So I'm going to take you back a little bit before that. Me being the oldest and being the oldest and having a mom that is a single mom, like, I was put in charge of a lot. Maybe you can relate to that as a witness. Just as witnesses, we were like already little adults, The little boys were wearing suits with briefcases. The little girls were like playing mommy to, like, probably to their siblings, Like, we had a lot of responsibility. I remember doing a lot of chores. Maybe that's just in my teenage brain, right? That I'm like, oh, am I doing everything? Like, I had all of these chores and the responsibility of getting my brother and sister off to school. And if they didn't go to school, I wasn't allowed to go to school. If we messed up, the way that my mom would ground me, she would tell me I couldn't go out and either field service or, I couldn't go with my friends, or I couldn't babysit to make money. There wasn't a lot of things for her to take away from me because we were extremely poor. We were raised out in the woods of Washington. She was adopted in by this great big family that had 40 acres, 8 kids, and so it was all divided up, 5 acres per kid, and they were all grown with their own families. And so we became sort of part of that, like, that community on that hill that was almost like a not a compound, but what would you call it? What's the word? I don't know. Help me out. But that's how we lived. That was very much like our family. And so, yeah, we were raised really, really poor. I remember one of those siblings had rented out to her the single wide trailer that was in the woods, covered in, covered in a mold. I mean, it was just growing up poor and being a Jehovah's Witness is something I never wish upon any kid at all. It was hard. It was rough. The fun times that we did have were watching Channel 9. My mom let us watch TV like barely, just a little bit. Like Channel 9, she would say yes to. And that's when we watched a lot of cooking shows on the weekend. And we always had food stamps because, the witnesses, they rely a lot on the government. They don't do a lot as far as making more money to pay more taxes or doing any sort of community service or, voting or anything like that. But they're definitely more than willing to take money from the government. And we did. Eventually, my mom, she did get off of public assistance when I was in high school. So the elders had let her go back to college to get a trade. They can you believe that? Allowed her to become a civil engineer. She was actually tested at a genius IQ when she was trying to figure out what she wanted to do after she got off welfare. At that point, they would let the mom stay home with their kids until that the youngest was in kindergarten. And so as soon as my sister, she's 8 years younger than me, went into kindergarten, my mom went back to college and she got tested with a genius IQ. And they said, well, you could do anything you want. What do you want to do? Well, she can't be a doctor, a lawyer, or anything prestigious like that. Anything that takes over 2 years of schooling was not allowed. So she had to decide on something that she was going to make a good living at, that she could be home for the meetings, because you have to go to the meetings, you have to be in field service. And so it had to be something that would work around all of that. So during that time in high school, when she went to college for those 2 years, it was a lot for me as a teenager. Like, I had to grow up quick. And I mean, I already did as a kid anyways, because when you're raised in an abusive household and you're constantly moving, you learn how to grow up real quick. So yeah, back to when I was 16 years old, my mom married this guy just out of the blue. I thought she was completely stupid, honestly, like really stupid. And I did feel angry, like what was wrong with us? Like, we had already been by ourselves for probably 5 years. I think 5 years, because they got divorced when I was 10. And so, yeah, so I felt like, who's this guy coming into our house? Well, anyways, this guy had his own agenda, and he told me that he had married my mom because he was in love with me. And he went after me, and he abused me. And when it was brought up to the elders told me not to talk to him. And I was publicly reproved. He was disfellowshipped. And the elders told me, don't talk to him anymore. And he did. He called one day and I answered the phone. Back in the day, the phone is like on the wall. So I did talk to him. And you don't have caller ID back in those days, right? And so for that, I was disfellowshipped because I guess I broke the rules. Yeah. At that time, my mom, I remember her being so upset and really almost just beside herself, like she had waited so long to find somebody. She found this guy, and then he turns out to be he just wrecked everything. He really did. And so I don't know if it was me being so depressed at that time or her, but I went to California to live with my grandma, and I decided I wanted to get reinstated. And when I went to live with my grandma, she was also very poor. She lived in a little shack in California, in Northern California. And she did not believe in the witness stuff, but she was the kind of, back in those days, They didn't, I don't know, it's like, I don't know, my grandma, she never really like, she never told my mom like, hey, I don't believe this, I think this is BS. But she didn't want to study the Bible. She would go to the meetings to support my mom. She would take me to meetings so I could get reinstated, but it just like, it wasn't for her. But she never badmouthed it or anything. So I got reinstated, and then I came back home back to Washington. I was causing a lot of trouble for my grandma, and I had started skipping school and drinking with my friends, my new friends. I mean, isn't that what I was supposed to do? Because the witnesses said if I wasn't a witness and I went against Jehovah, that my life would be terrible. And that's when it started. That's really when it started. I started skipping school, drinking. I started smoking marijuana and hanging out with some really shady characters. And so then when I had caused my grandma too much trouble, my mom she came to pick me up and she brought me back to Washington, but she didn't bring me home to that compound, right? I think it's what you call it, a compound. She didn't bring me to the 40 acres. She had gotten a job in Seattle, and so she moved me to Seattle. And it wasn't a nice part of Seattle. Like, we were really in the ghetto. So if you know anything about Rainier Beach, South Seattle, that's where we were living. And when I tried to go back to high school, the school said, well, there's no way that you can get in right now. You're gonna have to go to the college and take these college courses that we don't have that class available or something like that. And so I was really, really depressed. And that's the first time I tried to take my life. Yeah. I was so sad. I remember I cut my hair really short too. And my mom being like, well, what is wrong with you? Like short, like all the way short, all over. And, because that had been such a big change for me. I went from being like a really good girl, Jehovah's Witness, like really, really good kid. The kid that everybody was like, if you could be more like her, you know. Like I felt like that was something I was really good at. Like I was good at being good, and I was praised for it a lot. As witnesses, we are so praised for just being people pleasers and like following the rules and like not don't give any pushback, don't talk back, like just do what you're supposed to do and don't say anything, right? So that was a huge change. I went from being a really, really good girl to being like really, really, really bad because I didn't know the limit. I didn't know. Now, it's like now I talk to my kids about, drinking and drugs and sex and all the things. And, how much if you take one shot of alcohol, like how does that compare to like a can of beer? Like I had no idea. So really what happened is I got myself in a lot of trouble, and I was very depressed. And so I just didn't care. I really was trying to take my life. And after that, my mom told me that she was moving from that house in Seattle. She goes, I don't know where you're going, but I'm leaving. I'm not going to be here anymore. I think she was really going through a hard time. It was really hard for her, I feel bad for her for what she went through because of this guy. And so when she left, I left too. And so I was only 17 and I got my first apartment. I had been reinstated at that time, and so I found a couple at the Kingdom Hall, and they had a mother-in-law apartment in Seattle, and it was really beautiful. It was right on Lake Washington. It was so pretty. It was just this little tiny studio, like a mother-in-law kind of thing. And so I stayed there, and yeah, they had book study downstairs, like kind of right next to where I was at. Yeah, these were a really nice witness family, but because of my depression and because of me really never getting any sort of help or treatment, like I did go to counseling when I was young. When I was 10 years old, my mom did take me to counseling, but at that point, I didn't have a lot of memory of what had happened. She had said that I was abused by my dad, um, but I don't remember any of it. And so when I went to talk therapy, which wasn't the right therapy for me, there wasn't much to talk about because I didn't remember anything. And so none of this stuff had been dealt with. And at 16 years old, what happened, and then at 17, being on my own, I worked at McDonald's in Rainier Beach. So if you guys are from Seattle or you know this area, Rainier Beach is rough, 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 rough. I was working down there in high school, and then I would go to work all week long, work 40 weeks at McDonald's, or 40 hours a week at McDonald's, and then I would go to the alternative school. So I would just go to the school for like an hour a week. I would get all the homework, and then I'd turn it all in, because really I only needed one class to graduate, and I really wanted to graduate. So that's what I did. I think that was one of the first times where I knew that I had been through so much. I'm like, if I can do that, what else can I do? You know? I mean, I know there's a point of, I don't know, how strong do you have to be? But I knew that I had it in me to do a lot more. So yeah, at 17, on my own. Yeah. I can't believe it, because I have two kids that are past 17, and I'm actually it's kind of like I'm speechless even saying this, because I just can't even believe that it actually even happened, you know? But yeah, at 17, then I ended up falling for this guy. I was kind of back and forth in meetings, because the book study was there in my house, so I had to go to that. But when they weren't watching me, when that family upstairs wasn't watching me, I was like smoking, I was still drinking, I was still trying to have a boyfriend. Like I was like living both lives, And so eventually I left. I left, and I had found this boyfriend, and we got into a lot of trouble together doing drugs. I ended up, after that, getting sober. Well, after I got pregnant, got sober, had my first daughter, and then had another kid. It's just been lots of kids. So I have two older kids with him. Now they're 28 and 25, my kids are. And then yeah, a lot of back and forth, a lot of like my two oldest ones, I had taken them to meetings, and whenever my life got really bad, I was like, oh, I got to go back to meetings, because it's what Jehovah said. He said it was going to be so bad. See, like it's really bad, I have to go back to meetings. So it was a lot of like back and forth, and the longest time that I ever stayed out was probably for 10 years, and that's when I was married to my second husband. And so, oh man, yeah, I think I should stop here though, because I really I want to tell like part two of my story, because it really, like, I'm 49 years old, and it's like there's so much life that happened. There's so much back and forth and different things, and I want to make sure I don't want to miss something. But I guess I could call this my ex Jehovah's Witness story from 0 to 17. Maybe this could be our part one. Yeah, and tomorrow I will be back, and I will tell you about my ex Jehovah's Witness story from 17 until it feels like too much. But thank you for being here with me. The reason that I want to tell my story, like I think I've told you in my first video, is because I feel like the more that we tell our stories and the more vulnerable we are, the more people are going to see that, and the more stories they're going to tell. We all have a story. Not one of them is better or worse than the other. It's like, yeah, we were Jehovah's Witnesses. It was rough. It was rough, It was hard. And I think when people on the inside, they're a Jehovah's Witness right now, if they can see the stories, if they can see that somehow their life is similar, or like, oh, you feel like, oh, you're not the only one, like, oh, that happened to me too, I think that that will really get people thinking about life, about what they want for their life, about that this is hard. Like, it is hard to step away from being a witness when it's all you ever knew your whole life. And so the more stories we tell, the more we can connect with each other. And that's my hope. That's my hope. And that is why I started this channel. I'm 49 years old, and I never saved a dime towards my retirement until I was 40, because I didn't think that this world was going to last. And I'll be 50 next summer. And Armageddon hasn't come. It didn't come in 1975, and I don't know if it's coming. But thank you for being here with me, and thank you for listening to my story, and I will see you on the next one. Bye, everyone.